It is so good to see you all, and it's so good to be here on the occasion of Stephanie's glorious tenure as just the kind of leader I'm going to be speaking to us about, and also to be present for the honoring of a team effort. I heard this new word, math discourse. I think that's just a fancy name for working together as a team, is it? Talking to each other, problem solving together, reviewing data. But my deeper pleasure is that I did my teacher training just down the road in Kealawa, Hawaii, when I was getting ready to teach in the Peace Corps. It was a long time ago, in 1966. So everything is just weaving itself together in a wonderful way. Now, when I was preparing, I went through this enormous listing, over 100 sessions a day for 3 days. So my first impression was, wow, there's a lot of expertise in the room. My second conclusion was there's a lot of people present here who really aspire to do their jobs very well on behalf of children and learning. My third conclusion was that you must be very tired, right? But I want to talk about different kind of fatigue, because this kind of fatigue, I think, will get over with. But the kind of fatigue, I just want to check with you, are you generally more tired now? Do you use the word exhaustion to describe yourself? Do you feel overwhelmed or increasing levels of tasks being put upon you? Because if you're not, then you should get down on your knees and thank God every night. Because this is a general description of how people who are committed to doing good work are experiencing the increasing demands, the increasing distraction, the increasing pressures to do more and more and more. In fact, just today, this morning, I read an article in the New York Times about you should not have your phone out while you're working. So if you have a desk, the advice was put the phone in a drawer and lock it. Because if it's on your desk, even if it's not turned on, you're going to reach for it. That's a description of addicts, if ever I've heard one. And we all are. I mean, aren't we? So that level of distraction, that level of increasing tasks, and the pressure for speed, and then the absolute insanity that I will talk more about of people who think they know what to tell us to do, and the increasing political anger and insanity. This is all making your work, my work, increasingly difficult. So what I want to do in this time with you is, after all the 300 concurrent sessions, after everything you've experienced, I want to literally lift up your spirits by lifting up your vision and giving you a different sense of identity about what you are trying to accomplish and who you choose to be in this very critical work. So that's the journey we're going to go on for about 45 minutes. My own recognition of the work that you have is that I'm going to link myself with you. I think those of us who work to promote learning have the best job in the world. Yeah? But because of what's going on in the world, it has its complications. So this is one of my adorable grandchildren, several years ago now. Now he's turning 11. But all of our work, especially as educators, I began life as an educator, all of our work is based on a desire to contribute. Is that right? Yes. And in this time, we experience not only the passion that brought us into this profession, the passion that brought you here, the chance to develop professionally, to do your job better, to make more of a contribution, yes. But then what happens is we meet the reality of the world. Okay? He is very adorable still. But think about how often your patience is tested, like an hour ago. How often you just are so exhausted that you just want to leave. How often you think, I really can't continue at this pace. How often you get into a conversation that doesn't end well. How often you're in the presence of colleagues who just suddenly explode at you. I think these are familiar experiences because I experience them directly and I hear about them from people everywhere. So the question is, how do we maintain our focus? How do we persevere? Because your work is essential. And I have to say that one of the other things that I've noticed for many years is you're in the work of learning and creating learning environments and communities that support people to learn. Learning is an old-fashioned concept. So I can tell you about 10 years ago, I started asking corporate audiences, so how much time do you spend learning together with your teams? And when they laughed at me, I knew we had a problem. Because learning has virtually disappeared because people don't have time to think. But you're in it for something very different. You're in it, I would say you're in it to preserve, not just learning forward, but to actually preserve the value of learning and to hold that ground because we're forgetting it as a culture. So this is my newest book. And it's a question that I started asking. I'm going to explore it with you. Who do we choose to be? Because these times demand conscious choice. You can't just keep doing what you used to do. You can't just go along to get along. And we're too tired too often and too upset too often by some inane, insane policy that comes down, or somebody who gets ill and our team loses someone important, or life just, last year you had hurricanes interfere with this conference. Let's hope St. Louis doesn't have a flood next year, but anything is possible in this very chaotic, turbulent world. There are three things I'm going to talk about, and they're the subtitles of this book. That's Zion National Park, which if you haven't been there, you should have gone. Now it's too crowded. I work a lot with national parks, and I consider this my park, Zion National Park. So, there is the West Temple, as it's called. We have to face reality. This is not a time just to pump ourselves up with false hopes or false optimism. We need to face reality so that we can claim our leadership. And in claiming that leadership, the fundamental work for us is to restore sanity, to restore thinking, to restore learning. So that's what we're going to talk about. I don't know if you know of Grace Lee Boggs, but you should. She was one of our great activists involved in every significant movement in American history from 1951 onwards, working primarily in Detroit, but being part of every movement, the labor movement, the feminist movement, the civil rights movement, and many other movements. I was with Grace when she was 98 at the Boggs Center in Detroit, and she was at that point, she died 2 years later at the ripe old age of 100. At 98, she was still sitting in a circle, full attention, asking good questions of a whole group I'd brought there. And this was her primary question. What time is it on the clock of the world? Where do you think we are? I'm not going to answer that question for you, but I am going to present, for example, the way Gandhi described this time. So Gandhi stated these as the 7 social sins for any civilization. I believe he was writing about the British Empire at the time because he first penned this in 1924. But these 7 social sins were so critical to him that just a few days before he was assassinated in 1945 in India, he wrote them down on a piece of paper and gave them to, I think, a nephew to remember. So here they are. See what you think. This is a description of when a society goes wrong. This is how it goes wrong. The first is politics without principle. Well, that's a far stretch for us these days, isn't it? Yes. But there it is. Wealth without work. Commerce without morality. Pleasure without conscience. Education without character. Science without humanity, and worship without sacrifice. Just take a minute and look at those and see if there is one that stands out to you. Besides the education without character, that's a done deal in this group. But just notice, this feels so highly accurate to me, and condemning, and descriptive. It is a commentary on where we are as a culture now. We are not there. You are not devoid of character. You are not devoid of principle. And you are sacrificing. And you're working hard. But this is a generalized description. And today, even as we've been here, it's now finished, was the funeral and honoring of President Bush. I want to honor this man for what he displayed in terms of character, principle, and I love this quote, especially because it's about his mother as well. When he was asked how he'd like to be remembered, he didn't pause and he didn't use the first person pronoun, what his mother used to call the great I am. He simply replied that we put the country first. So this was a man of the greatest generation who knew what sacrifice was for and did not hesitate. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with his policies, but actually I disagreed with a lot of them at the time. But what he was, what he represented, was a quality of dignity and acting from principle. And I think it's great we're in Texas on the very day that the whole federal government is closed to honor this great man. There was a great quote from World War II, "We shall not see his likes again." And unfortunately, that's what I also felt at John McCain's funeral observance. So where are we? I think we're here. I could use this as a Rorschach test, couldn't I? But some of the insanity, and I'm going to use these two terms, sane and insane leadership, and I will tell you what sane leadership is in a moment. But this is treating everybody as a non-living being. We've talked about using people as cogs in the machine, using them as, I have to tell you a personal story, because one of the ways that this became very prevalent in the language in corporate America was to describe people in terms of being units. One woman I know resigned from her position in a large company when she looked at the budget and she saw that she was listed as an income-generating unit. By the way, I'm not going to let educators off the hook here, but I'm going to tell you a different stories from a different sector. So I've raised a lot of children, and my youngest son, Nico, is doing very well in sales. So he comes home, he's married, and I'm over at his house sitting with his wife, and he comes home and is so excited. He said, well, I had 43 units there tonight. And I said, Nicholas, they're people. You cannot use that word to describe people. And he said, okay, Mom. You know, I mean, he's 30 at the time of this conversation, so he's old enough to know this. So a few weeks go by, and we're together again at a family gathering, and he's telling me, he said, well, I just did a great seminar. There were like 36 units there, and then he stopped. He said, what did you call them, Mom? I said, I called them people. But this mentality of just treating people as numbers, which, by the way, makes it appear that people are manageable, right? Makes it appear that everything's in control. I mean, if you need to reduce your budget by 10%, it's just a simple change in numbers on a spreadsheet. No one really thinks about the consequences. So as we get into this mentality of treating everyone as the same, as a unit, it's led to this. And it's led to what is on so many school walls when you walk in, which is all their achievement stats. No pictures of kids. I've been horrified by a few schools I've been in lately. Where are the children? Where are the human beings here? This is the current craziness where people think they have control because they have some interesting numbers appearing up front. You know better, I'm sure. You know better. And so I want to talk to you about Sane Leadership. This is from your beautiful brochure. But why is it so essential to work against, push aside, and reclaim what it means to be a sane leader? The current dynamics, everything I'm describing, education without character, politics without principle, wealth without work, religion without sacrificing anything for it. These are the current dynamics that we do not represent. And we need to understand that we are standing up against these very destructive, dehumanizing, oppressing the human spirit dynamics. And this is our work. This is our work. The question I've been asking leaders now for about 5 years is, how do you choose to use your power and influence to create protection for people, to honor the fact that people have human spirits, to honor the fact that we need to be protecting people rather than oppressing or even abusing them? This is our work. So here's my definition of sane leadership. It's the unshakable confidence that people can be generous, creative, and kind. The operative phrase there, though, is can be. We have more than enough evidence of how barbaric and savage we can be. It's increasing, and it's always been that way. That's part of the darker angels of our nature. But we also know, and this is, I'm sure, your own motivation, that people can be creative, generous, and kind. The can be phrase is about your leadership. Can you be the leader who creates the conditions for people's generosity, creativity, compassion, kindness to come forth. That's our work as leaders, to create the conditions for people to rediscover, if they've forgotten it, to rediscover how wonderful we can be. Now, I've been intrigued that these patterns on the ceiling are Maori from New Zealand, because this is one of my favorite quotes from Maori Wisdom. What is the most important thing? It is people, it is people, it is people. So, in honor of that, I've recently created a new award for sane organizations. I will certify them as UMaine, depending on how they raise and handle people. This is from an egg carton. What can I say, really? So my motto is, if we can do it for chickens, we can do it for people. Yes. So you can qualify for this award. I'm happy to give as many as possible out. So I want to talk a little bit more about human nature before I go on to giving you some specifics about how to bring out how to lead, how to bring out people's generosity, creativity, and kindness. And a lot of my learning has been from just south of here, Houston, the 4th largest city in America. Incredible work being done in 62 community centers with people from over 100 different nations. And this phrase, earn, learn, and belong, was coined by their great, now retired CEO, Angela Blanchard, who's one of the greatest community leaders on the planet, and now retired. She was visiting refugee camps. This is actually quite a luxurious-looking refugee camp. I have a dear friend who worked here in the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. She ended up having a nervous breakdown because of the impact of so many people now caught in war and famine. But Angela went and visited from Houston, Texas. She went and visited these refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan. And she realized in talking to people that every human being, if there's just a spark of life left, if their spirit is not extinguished, it's very hard to extinguish the human spirit, as I hope you found out. Every human being wants to earn their way and not accept handouts. They want to contribute. We want to contribute. Every human being wants to learn, and every human being has an unquenchable need to belong. So she coined this phrase, earn, learn, and belong. We're talking about whatever the problem, community is the answer. There was a very well-known story of a Native American community up in British Columbia, may have been in the US, but it was that area, where it had a terrible suicide rate among teenagers. And that turned around when the following incident became known. There was a young kid standing on a bridge getting ready to throw himself over into the river. Ironically, the river was called the River of Life, but he was about to kill himself there. And as he's standing on the bridge, a car goes by and somebody waves at him. They just waved, and that stopped him. The community got smart and realized, which I think you have already discovered, that the need to belong and the absence of feeling connected, you put those two together in our very crazy social media culture. And there you have the explanation of why so many kids are feeling meaningless enough to kill themselves. It's the second leading cause of death in the world among teenagers, the first being accidents. And it's increasing dramatically. You may know this statistic, but children starting at age 8 are killing themselves. This is where community is essential. The need to belong is fundamental to human beings. That's why you're doing your work, to satisfy the need for learning, to do it in teams or in community, so that people feel they have a future, people feel they have a community. So here's a photo I just uncovered. I just want you to look at it. This is from one of the bombed out cities in Syria. And what are the children doing? They're playing. This says more to me about the human spirit as a testimony to who we are than any other photo I've discovered. Every human being needs to earn, learn, and belong, and children naturally seek out play in order to just stay present, to get through. I think it's a glorious photo. So my own work, after many years of working with leaders, I'm going to talk more about this in a moment, but my own work is to summon us as leaders to be warriors for the human spirit. Warriors are a category of people who set themselves apart from the current dynamics that are so destructive. And we, as warriors for the human spirit, are non-aggressive. In fact, we have a commitment to not add to the aggression and fear of this time. But this is something I would just like you to consider, because you already have been a warrior for the human spirit. In any of your work, think of a time when you have just, without question, stood up to defend a child, a person, a policy, a place, just because it was the right thing to do. Can you all think of a time when you've done that? Because you're here. I know you've done this quite a lot. You go the extra mile, or you find yourself speaking out, probably not to your own benefit, but you just had to make a stand. That's why I call this warriorship rather than something more, pleasant or bland. It's a true action of courage on behalf of the human spirit. It could be an individual, it could be a policy decision, it could be a place. But I'm going to just offer that to you as an image. Because at the heart of who we are is this lovely statement from a World War II philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas, who said, "Faith is not a question of the existence or non-existence of God, believing that love without rewards is valuable." Whatever your faith in the sacred, in the divine, whatever form that takes, believing that love without rewards is valuable. Yes? Can you claim that as part of your faith, part of your motivation, what keeps you going? And the role that faith plays was really beautifully illustrated to me when the leadership of Catholic nuns in this country was attacked by the Vatican. It's a long story. If you're Catholic, you know about it. I wrote about it in Who Do We Choose to Be, because it was such an extraordinary quality of leadership based on their faith in the gospel, they're Catholic nuns, based on their faith in people, based on their faith in their work. So where this phrase originated was that they were in the Vatican, and they were under serious attack by cardinals who wanted to control the women and force them into obedience. They were just, that was the whole purpose. let's control the women. Yeah, let's laugh at that. And, but they thought they were going to get away with it. They had no idea of us, men and women, and what nuns meant to millions of people in this country. They only did this for American nuns who were just too uppity. So in a terrible meeting where they were presented with this basically diabolic plan to make them obey and bring them under the control of the Vatican, they were just shocked. They were absolutely unaware that this was coming. And at the same time, in a very bad PR move, the Vatican released their statement to the press before the leaders, the 3 women leaders, could tell their sisters about what had happened. They miscalculated that one because everyone rose up in outrage. How could you dare to seek to put down and deny the value of Catholic sisters? So at the end of this terrible meeting, I'm giving you the glossed over story here, but they were packing up, the 3 women leaders were packing up their things, and the cardinal, who's really a diabolic figure consistently, came over, and he was just like looming over at the sisters, and he said with a sneer, "You are not afraid, are you?" The sisters sat there, they looked at each other, and then one of them said this, "We are faithful, therefore we are not afraid." I have used this now personally. I have advised leaders about this. Whenever you get scared, whenever you get overwhelmed, if you can take a moment of reflection and ask yourself, have I been faithful? Have I been faithful? Now, you have to know what your faith is. And I'm not talking about church-originated theology or faith. I'm talking about what are you faithful to. Here's another quote from Levinas. One is commanded to goodness even if it is futile. If you know why you're doing what you're doing, if you know that you're there to serve learning, to serve individuals, to serve children, to serve the future, if you know that that is your article of faith, then I really strongly encourage you, anytime you get scared, anytime you get overwhelmed, don't think about what did I do wrong, what should I have done, I'm scared that this isn't going to get funded. Just let that go, but you have to choose a quiet moment here and ask yourself, have I been faithful? And you will find, guaranteed, your fear disappears. And we recommit to this work that is increasingly difficult, but increasingly necessary. So what I'd like to do now is talk about your leadership. I'm just trying to go ahead. Just give a second here. I'm going to present one image of leadership and then give you 2 things to take home. If you ever wanted a takeaway, boy, have I got takeaways for you today. Okay. So after many years of talking about wide-scale system change and being known as a systems thinker, which I still am, for sure, I've settled upon what is it possible for us to create with our leadership? How can we best use our power and influence? And that is in this, what I'm calling creating islands of sanity, which are local, which are workable, which are pragmatic, and within our reach. Teddy Roosevelt said it beautifully, do what you can with what you have where you are. And I would just add, with the people in front of you. We need to stop putting our energy into waiting for anybody to solve our problems. In fact, all we can count on them, the people above us, the political environment, all we can count on is they're going to be creating more and more problems, right? So it's up to us to use that can be. People can be creative, generous, and kind. And how do we do that? Well, the first thing is you understand that you're relying on human beings. I just learned there's a large corporate campaign called 100% Human. Well, that's good news. Okay. And I meet a lot of my colleagues who feel that any of our work now in organizations or in education is to reconnect people to their humanity, because this is what's being forgotten. This phrase, human beings, also came from Grace Lee Boggs when I was with her. So how do you lead an island of sanity? Well, the first thing is you understand you're an island. You're different. You're unique. You're setting yourselves apart from the general turbulence, from the craziness, from the insanity. You're creating a buffered zone, a protected place where people can still remember to do what it feels like to be together in harmonious relationships, to do good work together. So many of our younger people do not have this experience, period. This is one of the things that us older people, the non-millennials, can really work on demonstrating, embodying what's it like to work well together. So this identity of we're an island, we're different, is really important. But the second one is don't expect applause for it. Don't expect people are going to say, oh, look what you've created. It's so wonderful. Let's do more of it. Let's replicate it. Let's go to scale. One of my great learnings for many years now in trying to shift paradigms is that good ideas with evidence to back them up and case studies and great materials, those things do not change the world. We have to do the work that feels honorable, reflects our integrity. We have to do that work because it's good work. We don't do that work in order to be praised, because if you want praise, you're going to get blame. If you want applause, you're going to get criticism. You've already learned this hard lesson. So we do the work because it's the right work, not because we're going to get praised for it. And the sooner we withdraw that need for recognition, you get it here. And I think this was available to all 100 plus presenters who offer these concurrent sessions. We do find it among interested colleagues, but in general, wherever you're doing this really good work, please don't expect anybody to applaud you or even notice it. And after a while, you stop even looking for it. And of course, you know this. One of the things I don't get is why we're not waking up to the fact that if we don't start learning really fast, we're the most endangered species on the planet. The one learning organization, the best learning organization I've ever seen. I've seen several now, but this was in 1993 or 94. I was working for the head of the U.S. Army. And I was getting to go around and observe all the ways and methods they were using to change. It was really, I have to say to all the women here, it was the only time in my life until I got old when I felt respected as a professional and a woman at the same time. I wasn't tested, I was just honored, but I was treated with a level of politeness, even courtliness, that still is memorable rather than sitting in like PepsiCo's CEO office and him just not believing a word I said and his lips sneering and such, you know. So in this work, I got to observe training events. And the Army has, again, this is in my new book if you're interested, has a wonderful practice called after-action reviews. When anything goes wrong, they gather together everyone who was involved, the whole system that was involved, and they ask 3 questions. I'm just whetting your appetite to buy the book at this point. Just know what I'm doing here, because you have to read about this. But they ask, what just happened? And they ask everybody there to describe it from their own perspective. No judgment, no correction, just you tell us what you saw happen. The second question they ask is, why do you think it happened? Everyone gives their reason for why it happened. And the reasons are different, and therefore you create a beautiful, robust picture of what happened from many different perspectives. And then you ask, what can we learn from this so we don't repeat the mistakes? So after observing this actually in the desert, I mean, this can sound very romantic because I was watching tank warfare go on. And afterwards, we were sitting over coffee, and I said to the colonel who was there, this is amazing. I have never seen so much learning in any organization. Peter's saying he felt the same thing by observing this. I said, this is really the only learning organization I've ever been in. This was in 1993 or 4. And he just smiled. He said, oh, Meg, we figured that one out a long time ago. It's better to learn than be dead. Right? I don't know why we're not understanding that as a species right now. Because that's what we're up against. Now, this is what I want to spend the remaining time with you on. How to be vigilant about the quality of your relationships. Whatever the problem, community is the answer. Well, community is all about relationships. Somebody did this meme quoting me, and I really love it. I don't know what that little animal is. But anyway, this is where I want to direct your attention right now. The first is, if you want to create a moral environment where there is integrity, this is a very old-fashioned concept these days, having ethics. And I don't say that jokingly. It's atrocious how little people even remember what it means to trust one another or to have consistent behavior because, like President Bush, it came from your sense of what can I live with? What's my integrity here? This is the core reason we don't have ethics in this culture right now. We don't feel we belong together. But in your island of sanity, that's the work. We're in this together. We're all in the same boat. We rise or fall together. All these wonderful expressions that are actually have the correct meaning and the correct perspective. Once you decide you're there for one another, that you belong together, you will have no problem with ethical behavior. So this is ethics, morality, integrity are a consequence of knowing who you are connected to and who you're in relationship with. That's why I use the phrase, pay exquisite attention to relationships. So here are 2 ways to check on the quality of your relationships, whether it's, you can use this in a family, you can use this privately, but you also need to use it with your teams. Organizationally, this first one is geared toward when there's a process decision, an action being taken, an activity or a decision being made, you need to be the one who notices, what impact is this having on our relationships? Because that's what people are noticing, by the way. I worked for a bank in England once where the boss offered huge amounts of money if you came up with a good idea. I mean, like $25,000 for a really excellent idea. And his staff came to him and said, we don't want this. This is creating competition. And he said, well, what would you like as thanks? They said, well, bring us a box of chocolates, that'll do. I've had this experience over and over again. So people notice when their relationships are being affected. It's your job, if you're here, I'm making it your job. I don't care about formal or informal leadership right now. What is the impact it's having on our relationships? Is it distancing us, making us more competitive, or is it bringing us together? The second one is a biggie. This you can do at home. How do you respond when something goes wrong? This is a blue-footed booby from the Galapagos Islands. I was about to step on him. It's actually a very graceful seagull, but he brought me to a halt. What happens when something goes wrong? Every time there's a crisis, every time something didn't work out, please sit down together and ask, what just happened? This is not the normal pattern in this culture. The normal pattern is this. We blame each other. And I think we also blame ourselves. We think it was all my fault or it's all your fault. Either way, it doesn't improve the quality of relationships. So if you would just pay attention, here's my takeaways. When something goes wrong, sit down and talk about it. You know this. But in this culture of blame, in this culture of haste, in this culture of, well, that didn't work, let's put it under the table so we can get another grant. We don't learn from our experiences. So there's a famous phrase now, I don't even know who said it first, but it's fail fast, fail often. So you could rename this whole wonderful organization, failing forward. That's a common phrase these days. But what it would mean is you trust one another to learn from experience. I have to laugh every time I encounter somebody who stands up and in a kind of overly pompous way said, well, every failure is a learning opportunity. Yeah, it is. Why didn't we remember that? Because you're in a culture of measurement and punishment and speed. That's why. So, it's up to you. When things go wrong, sit down and talk about it. Gosh, that's such simple advice. And it's magical. And you'll learn from it. And pay attention, please, to relationships. The last one is to realize what you are doing is that your motivation is unquenchable. I hear from so many activists, and I feel this personally, I can't not do this work. If I stopped doing this work, I would shrivel and die. Inside, at least. When we have this level of motivation that I can't not do this, that gets you through. But the great gift that we're giving people is we're giving people meaningful work again. Good relationships, a sense of community and teamwork. When teams think together, they actually solve problems. and therefore they grow in capacity just like any child as a learner would do. So this is our work, and the reason we do it is what Václav Havel said. He defined hope. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. We need to have that deep sense of certainty about what we're doing, because that's our ultimate source of hope. We just keep moving forward, doing what needs to be done. So I'm going to close now with a beautiful prophecy from the Hopi elders, the Southwest, the most peaceful Native American nation in the land, really the keepers of the earth. They issued this prophecy, among many, many others, in the year 2000 for how we needed to enter the new millennium. I organized my little book, Perseverance, around this quote. They define the times. Here is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid, who will try to hold on to the shore. They are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. Know that the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, and keep our heads above water. And I say, see who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment we do, our spiritual growth and journey come to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration, for we are the ones we have been waiting for. I hope you will understand that this is our time to be the embodiment of what it means to be creative, generous, and kind, and to create that for other people around us, for the benefit of all these precious children and our very precious endangered future. Thank you very much.